On October 7th, 1985, Julia McKenna was found wandering close to the Salsbury Woods of New Hampshire, disoriented, hypothermic, and severely malnourished. She was taken to Concord Hospital, where she refused a doctor's examination. During her time there, she shifted between full coherency and psychotic episodes. She was adamant it was still 1985 and got hysterical when a nurse told her it was now 1988. Julia refused to speak to the police and was later taken to a community shelter. It was there that she got to know Father Andrew. On seeing how tormented she was by her past, he persuaded her to open up to him in the hope this would bring her some clarity. On sharing her story with him, he was horrified by the terrors that she'd endured and urged her to allow him to tell the local authorities. She eventually agreed and is now living under a different name, under witness protection. This is Julia McKenna's account of the fateful events that happened to her back in Salisbury Woods all those years ago. I didn't have an easy upbringing. My parents were a question mark in my life. As a result, by the age of 16, the number of foster families I'd had were in the double digits. The latest one, the Reeds, were the worst of the lot. They didn't care about me. They only cared about interacting with me as little as possible and cashing in each and every month. On the occasions they did talk to me, they were cruel, and they got a kick out of mocking me, telling me repeatedly how unwanted I was. They knew what they were doing. They made sure that on the outside I appeared to be well looked after, but on the inside, I was suffering from all that emotional abuse. I knew I couldn't stay in that environment anymore. It was just too much to bear, so I confided in my only friend, Sarah, about my intent to run away. She didn't want me to leave, but she understood why I had to do it, and she promised to help me. I'd saved up some money from waitressing part-time and asked Sarah to keep it safe for me. I didn't want to keep it in my room as I didn't trust the Reeds not to take it out of spite. The plan was on. So, with just my school backpack filled with clothes and supplies, I skipped school and went to the bus station, where I'd arranged to meet Sarah to get my money and say goodbye. Only when I arrived, I saw Sarah in the parking lot in her mom's Jeep, which was packed full of camping equipment. She told me that she wanted to take one last trip together. In Salsbury Woods, we spent most weekends there, taking the hiking trails, toasting marshmallows, and watching the leaves transition through the seasons. My life was miserable, but those weekends, surrounded by the beautiful, untouched scenery of nature, well, they gave me the strength to recharge. As much as I wanted to stick to my plan and flee this town ASAP, I couldn't say no to Sarah. She was my only friend, and as I saw it, I at least owed her this. So we drove out to the woods, parked in a clearing by the north side entrance, and hiked further into the woods. As we walked, we didn't say much. We didn't need to. Being with her out there, with only our footsteps and the sounds of birds, it was refreshing. And at the time, I was so grateful I had Sarah in my life. We pitched our tent deep into the woods. Sarah chose the spot, and I went along with it. It was only when I was scraping my boot against the bottom of a tree trunk that I looked up and I saw this unusual purple mark carved into the bark, an eye with 3 vertical lines etched through it. I traced my fingers over it, transferring what looked like purple dye onto my fingertips. I was about to wave Sarah over to take a look at it, but that's when I heard her high-pitched scream. I hurried to her to find her perched on a fallen tree, waving a shaky finger at a spider. I found it funny that someone who loved the outdoors as much as Sarah did was so freaked out by spiders. But I picked the spider up and I put it in a bush. After that commotion, I forgot about that strange symbol. It was only as we watched the sunset and toasted s'mores that I saw Sarah looking at my purple fingertips. The look in her eyes, I don't know. It's as if they knew something I didn't. And I mentioned the symbol and asked her what she thought it could be. She just shrugged, but I heard the doubt in her voice as she replied, "It's probably just a trail marking." Her reaction was weird, but it had been a really long day, so I told myself I was probably overthinking it. We put out the campfire and turned in for the night. Sarah fell asleep pretty quickly, but I couldn't seem to switch off. As I lay there in the itching sleeping bag Sarah had brought along for me, surrounded by darkness, all I could think about was what my new life would be like. At first, I heard rustling sounds coming from nearby trees. I lay still and listened, my heartbeat frantic. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a fox, but the rustling soon turned into footsteps. One's too heavy to be such a light-footed animal. I sat up in my sleeping bag and I listened. That's when I heard it. This wispy voice echoed, "The eyes are everywhere. The eyes are everywhere. The eyes are everywhere." Footsteps followed the words, footsteps that sounded like they were just outside of the tent. I shook Sarah awake, and I told her that someone was outside of our tent. She grabbed the flashlight, stuck her feet in her sneakers, and walked out of the tent to go look. I begged her not to go, but there was no changing Sarah's mind when it was set. I sat there hugging my legs and freaking out that something was going to get my friend. I was so on edge that she wouldn't return, and I'd be all alone out there in the woods and in the darkness, not knowing what to do next. And then I heard it. A shrill scream that echoed through the trees and raced through my head. I unzipped the tent and I stepped barefoot into the dirt. Sarah had the only flashlight, so not knowing what else to do, I just stood there terrified and shouting Sarah's name. I thought this was it, that she'd gone and wasn't coming back. I felt the panic rise in me, and my breaths came out as frantic pants. Suddenly, something grabbed my shoulders and said boom. I jumped off my feet and turned to see Sarah there, the flickering torchlight framing her smirking face. When she saw how terrified I was, she just shrugged and told me she was just messing. After that, we went back into the tent, both of us too hyped to sleep. We swigged vodka from the bottle and talked about our fears. She told me how she hated spiders ever since she drank a glass of water with one in it as a child. I told her my biggest fear, one I'd not told anyone before, a fear of feeling completely alone in the world. She consoled me and told me I'd never be alone, as regardless of the distance between us, I would always have her. It felt good to feel like I had someone. A feeling that in hindsight made me overlook the flaws. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember waking up to sunlight and the musky smell of stale alcohol. My head was thudding like a drum, and there was this out-of-focus haze to everything. I'd been hungover a couple of times before, but never felt like this. Then I saw that Sarah wasn't there, but there was something on top of her sleeping bag, propped up against her curled up sweater. I stared at it in shock, a lump forming in my throat. It was a grainy photograph of a waitress serving food to a table of customers, and drawn across her face in purple ink was a symbol, one of an eye with 3 vertical lines through its center, identical to the marking on the tree. I looked at the friendship bracelet the waitress was wearing and then fiddled with the same one on my wrist. The person in this photo, with a strange symbol carved across their face, was me. I didn't know what was going on, but the fear was real. I managed to stagger outside of the tent, desperately scanning the area through my haze for Sarah. As I stepped forward, I felt my bare feet squelch in something. Looking down, I saw it, a scarf saturated in blood. I spotted a small segment that wasn't stained. I saw the floral pattern and was filled with a fresh sense of dread. I recognized it. It was Sarah's scarf. This was all too much. I didn't know what to do. I screamed Sarah's name until my voice went hoarse. And then I packed a backpack and Sarah's flashlight and left that campsite. But I couldn't drive. So I knew even looking for Sarah's car keys was completely pointless. My only option was to try and find help from another hiker or from the roadside. I didn't know where I was going, as I always used to just follow Sarah. I walked aimlessly, my headache increasing with each step and my fear escalating. It didn't feel real. Instead, it felt like one long fever dream. I ended up slumped against a tree trunk, the vomit trying to wriggle out of me. I heard laughter in the distance. I swear I saw her, Sarah, glide past in a velvet purple cloak. I thought I was imagining it, that I was as crazy as the reeds constantly told me I was. I clutched the side of my head. I closed my eyes, and I repeatedly tried telling myself this wasn't real. I don't know when the blur faded and reality crept in on me. I just recall the setting sun, a peachy glaze in the darkening sky. As I rose to my feet, I saw it there, carved into the tree trunk, the purple eye symbol with the 3 lines, and I looked at my still stained fingertips and I felt that fear curdle in my gut. That symbol. I swear, it hadn't been there when I'd sat down by that tree. I heard a rustling ahead of me. Then someone stepped out. I glimpsed a velvet purple cloak and I heard those haunting words. The eyes are everywhere. The eyes are everywhere. I started running. My unstable, shaky legs refusing to carry me quickly. It was now pitch dark in the woods, and I was there in the gloom, too afraid to use a flashlight and taunted by the voices. They seemed to be circling me, all of them saying the same thing over and over. The eyes are everywhere. The eyes are everywhere. I was on the ground now, crawling through the leaves and dirt, but they knew where I was. I heard them close by, honing in on me like prey. Then, as I was crawling, my leg fell through the ground. I shrieked out without meaning to, as I gripped one hand to my mouth. I used the other to aim the flashlight on my leg, and that hole had a rope ladder leading into, well, what appeared to be some kind of tunnel. There was a boulder by the side of it, with recent slide marks in the dirt. As I wavered the flashlight across it, I doubled back on a spot, illuminating the small, but now familiar, purple-tinged eye symbol carved right there. I knew this went far beyond coincidence. I'd been brought here by those people, as if I was nothing more than an animal chased toward a trap. I could hear them around me, their sinister chanting reminding me that I didn't have a choice. I climbed down the rope ladder, losing my grip halfway down and falling onto my knees. the flashlight landing next to me with a flickering clatter before going out completely. I felt the bumpy, damp wall to guide me as I walked forward. My knees throbbed and my mind was alive with doubt. Is this where they brought Sarah? Was I walking to my own death? In the corner of my eye, I could see a flickering of light. I forced my aching limbs forward, and I spotted the torchlights fixed to the walls. I forced myself forward, terrified, but knowing this was my only choice. And then I heard a whispering voice. Guys are everywhere. Guys are everywhere. And I tripped over something, panicking. I grabbed it, thinking I could use it as a weapon. Bad idea. My eyes fell on what it was in the dim light. A rotting human head with wisps of hair and insects wiggling through its empty eye sockets. I dropped it and I let out a silent scream, too horrified and exhausted to utter even a sound. And that's when I saw the bones, hundreds of them, embedded into the walls. This tunnel was built upon death, and I just had my hand all over it. I wanted to get out of this tunnel, but I could hear the whispers all around me. I had nowhere to go but forward to whatever horrors awaited me. I was someone with nothing left to lose. I didn't have a family that would miss me. My only friend had disappeared, and I was living my worst fear. These strangers may have been taunting me, but I felt truly alone. I was living my biggest fear, and that does something to a person. No one would come looking for me. If this was my end, then I needed to go out, trying to save my only friend. I forced myself forward, the tunnel growing narrower. I squirmed when my shoulder rubbed against the bone wall. I forced myself not to look at it, to keep going forward. I heard this cackling laughter. At first, I thought it was in my head, but it was followed by rattling sounds. As the tunnel widened into a room, I spotted him in the corner, one wrist chained to the wall, skin swollen around it as if chain and flesh were fused as one. It was a man. It was evident he'd been there a long time. In a splutter, I asked him who he was. He rattled the chain and with a disturbed laugh said, "The eyes are everywhere. The eyes are everywhere." I was so detested with this that I didn't sense the presence right behind me until it was too late. Hands grabbed my shoulders, but this time they held me there, unflinching, the nails digging into my flesh. I turned my head and I saw her there, Sarah, in a purple velvet cloak, the hood pulled up slightly so it didn't fully hide her face. I was too afraid to move. She moved a hand and started stroking my hair as she whispered, "My dear Julia, the eyes are everywhere. The eyes are everywhere." None of this made any sense, but before I could process it, I saw them appear, dozens of them, all in one of those velvet cloaks, the hood pulled up so their faces remained mysteries. Hands reached out and grabbed me, dragging me forward, and they walked and chanted in unison as if they were one being. They were one horror. At the far end of the room was an altar made from a crooked tree trunk. The edges of it were stained red, and resting on top of it was a blade, sharp and silver-handled. I felt a push forward and my hand was held there on the altar. I tried moving it, but I was outnumbered. I was powerless. I could no longer tell Sarah apart from the sea of purple. Then one of them stepped forward and lifted the blade. I saw eyes gleaming red and focused directly on my arm. They chanted words in a language I didn't understand. I think I screamed, but I'm not sure if it was silent or real. Either way, The chants became louder, constant chants, and laughter. Laughter from the chained man, and then suddenly silence. I felt all of their eyes set on me, as they said at the same time, "The eyes are everywhere. The eyes are everywhere." I saw that blade glisten in the fake light as it moved toward my hand. I closed my eyes. I felt my breath, unable to look, and I heard the blade connect with something, but I didn't feel anything. I opened my eyes, expecting to see my own severed hand right there. There was a severed hand there, bloody and fresh, but I flinched my fingers. It wasn't mine. Sarah stepped forward and lowered her cloak. She looked at me with those same features, but appearing altogether different. I didn't know her anymore. I don't think I ever truly did. She cupped something in her hands. I saw wiry, long legs poke through the gaps. Then she revealed a spider. She lowered it on the severed hand, and I watched it scuttle across the gaped flesh. The cloaked figures weren't holding me anymore. I don't know the exact point they let go of me, but they were chanting around that severed hand and watching the spider intently. I stumbled away from them until I came to the chained man. He was tilted over, a wheezy noise coming out of his mouth. A laugh. An almost silent laugh. I looked up and I saw his arm in the chain. I gasped when I saw it. His chained hand that had been there when I first seen him was now missing, yet he continued to rest his stump there as if nothing had changed at all. He was free of his chain, but chose to remain trapped. Blood was pouring out of his wound onto his scruffy clothes and the floor, yet he didn't seem to even notice. He raised his head long enough to laugh out. "The eyes are everywhere. The eyes are everywhere." And he pressed a dirty finger to his cracked lips. I stumbled onward through the tunnel, desperate to get out of there. The next thing I remember was a fog forming all around me. I started coughing, a cough that seemed to fall as silent as the man's laughter. There was a blur of purple, followed by only darkness. I woke up in my tent, in the woods, dazed and confused. Sarah's sleeping bag and belongings were gone, as if she'd never been there at all. And for a moment, I thought maybe it'd all been in my head. I'd been so desperate for a friend that I just made her up. I laughed at that. I laughed at the ridiculousness of it all. That's when I felt the ebbing pain in the back of my neck. I rifled through my backpack for my compact mirror and spent ages angling it just right so I could glimpse it. I didn't want to believe, but now I know exactly what it is. The eyes are everywhere. The eyes are everywhere. And I ran, and I didn't stop running. But wherever I went, and whatever I did, they found me. They wouldn't let me leave. Running. I've been running for years, trying to escape them. But the eyes are everywhere. The eyes are everywhere. Julia McKenna insisted she didn't know what happened to her for 3 years she spent in those woods. There are theories that the cult drugged her, but the motives behind her being there remain unknown. Perhaps it was simply because Julia was a person who wouldn't be missed. Or maybe the reasons behind it are more sinister. As for Sarah, maybe she never truly existed and was a figment of Julia's imagination. Or maybe everything Julia said about her was true. Julia couldn't have tattooed that symmetrical eye symbol onto the back of her neck. Someone did that. Cults, symbols, the absences of time. There's no question that dark secrets lie within Salsbury Woods. One's tangled in mystery. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.